Hi, this is Dominic Pace, who plays Gecko the Bounty Hunter from The Mandalorian, and you are listening to Star Wars Comics in Canon.
Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings episode 51. So hello there guys, I hope you enjoyed last week's episode, the special 50th episode where it was a Q&A with myself and Megan. I really hope you guys enjoyed that. Anyone who follows Genuine Chit-Chat will know who Megan is. Anyone who doesn't, well, go back and listen to that episode. She's my girlfriend and it was really cool talking to her because she's obviously into Star Wars somewhat, but not quite as much as me. But it was still a really fun conversation and things, so go back and check that out. But yes, this week we are tackling Doctor Aphra. So it is the next in the Doctor Aphra volumes. I think this is volume like 5 or something. It's called the Catastrophe Con. There are 6 parts to this, so 6 wonderful comics. The first issue, which is number 20, was released in May 2018. The 6th issue, which is number 25, was released in October 2018. And the trade paperback collection was released in January 2019. The writer for this is Simon Spurrier, the penciler is Kev Walker, the inker is Marc Deering, and the colorist is Java Tartaglia. Now this comic I'm tackling is quite a doozy. There's a lot that goes on, there's a lot of connections that goes on, and there's loads of craziness, including space mold. So, nothing really more crazy than that, is there? So, getting on with things, I want to clarify that the last volume of Doctor Aphra I tackled on the show was on episode 46. So make sure you go back and check that out if you haven't listened already, or if you've read up to Aphra, you can do that too. If you've never read Aphra ever, and you've never heard me talk about Aphra ever, I would probably recommend you, listen to one of my episodes about her or read it yourself. But if not, I'm not complaining. More listeners for me and more people consuming Star Wars content. Can't be better than that. So here is the crawl. It is a time of instability within the galaxy as the Rebel Alliance battles the Galactic Empire. For those operating on the fringes, there is much potential for profit. Rogue archaeologist Doctor Aphra is no stranger to the risk in the pursuit of both credits and thrills, and she desperately wants to get back to what she does best, locating and liberating rare artifacts. But her recent exploits in blackmailed servitude by the psychotic droid crime lord 000 have landed her in custody and earned her the ire of both rebels and Imperials alike. So starting with issue number 20 obviously, this all starts on a place called the Akreska Jail, and I'm going to read Aphra's description of this because it's quite mental. And for clarity, she's been in Akreska Jail at this point for 1 week. You know what? This will sound crazy, but it's actually kind of beautiful. 80,000 tons of wrecked warships held together with an attractor node hauled about by a cruiser on strings. I already think of it as a home. And you guys, you guys give us everything we need. Atmosphere, gravity, light. Yep, as jailers go, you're more than generous. You don't even ask for much in return. Now, this comic does open with her. There's a massive monologue from Doctor Aphra. I'm not going to read the whole thing. That was just like a little part of it. But essentially, she's a prisoner on this jail and she's calling herself Joystick Chevron because that's what her sort of alias is, or one of her aliases is. And what they basically do is they use prisoners aboard the ship to basically board enemy vessels. So the jail goes near, say, a rebel fleet of some sort or a rebel giant ship. They basically attach onto it and they just send in the prisoners as like cannon fodder. So they all get like mowed down and things, but take some of the rebels with them. Therefore, the Empire doesn't lose quite as many resources and the prisoners get taken care of. It's also clear that Aphra is being mind probed by someone. It reveals it in this comic, and she's basically being interrogated, but quite badly, and she's trying to, talk her way out of things as per usual. So on this Akreska Jail, it's doing her sort of narration while it's showing you what happened, basically, so I'm just going to tell you what happened. Aphra is in a group of prisoners along with a hub droid, and if they get too far from this hub droid, then their neck collar explodes. Now, they're in this active war zone, and if you get, I think it's about 20 meters away from this hub droid that basically just slowly moves forward and is pretty hard to be destroyed by, rebel forces and stuff, as opposed to fleshy people who are very easily destroyed by sort of blaster fire and whatnot. So the hub droid goes closer and closer, and as the prisoners have to get closer, otherwise their head explodes. And Aphra tinkers with the droid while it's sort of commanding other people from behind, and then it explodes. Then their collars basically start to beep and things, and it is clear that when the hub droid gets destroyed or tampered with or anything, within a certain amount of seconds, all of the implants that were connected to that hub droid would then explode as well. So it's kind of like a failsafe thing. And Aphra is with this person called Lopset Yas, and they're an unknown alien species that I couldn't find anywhere else. They basically just look kind of wide. They've got really wide eyes, sort of brownish skin and no nose. They just look like a standard sort of alien in Star Wars. And as their implants are about to explode, another droid appears and their implants connect with this droid, and therefore they don't die. The droid they connect with is none other than Dek Nil, who is the droid who's got this very strange outlook on life and has this improbability reader thing where it basically, it was explained more in the last episode where I spoke about Aphra, but it's basically the improbability drive is so strong that it can basically predict when something really improbable is going to happen. So for example, it will shoot a blaster at a certain angle, it will bounce off like 12 things, hit something that was falling from the ceiling, and then because of that it will do like a perfect bullseye shot to something that otherwise would be impossible. It's that sort of thing. But the droid is nuts as well. It like talks about how it can sort of taste colours and see sounds and all kinds of other strangeness. But it's a really fun character. I really like Dek Nil. And it turns out that Dek Nil actually had a crew attached to them beforehand, but they all seem to die in very improbable ways, which is quite interesting. It then changes to where 000 is, and he's thinking about Doctor Aphra and whatnot, and BT kind of beeps at him, and he's like, oh, sorry, I was miles away. No, I'm not angry. What would give you that impression? And then it zooms out, and at the Sontul spaceport, which is where Sontul was where the base of operations, where that gang crime syndicate was, and 000 basically just went in there and killed all of them, and then took over. And at this spaceport, that he says, I don't get angry, BT, and there are just corpses everywhere. And clearly he's on the search for Dr. Aphra because, in summary, in the last one, she had access to 000's memories, his first ever murder that he really wanted, but she encrypted it in such a way that he wouldn't be able to access it. Anyway, back on the Kreska jail. So there is a restraining bolt on Dek Nil, but apparently because Dek Nil is made out of Beskar, which is something that people will definitely know if they've seen The Mandalorian, the restraining bolt shouldn't do anything. It just does nothing because it's too thick. Aphra then finds an escape pod, and then as they kind of get nearer to it, the restraining bolt that is on Dek Nil sort of glows and things and slowly gets pushed in. And then Dek Nil becomes under the Imperial control, blows up the escape pod, and the restraining bolt now works. As that's happening, Aphra's looking around trying to figure out what on earth just happened and sees what looks to be some sort of old man in a cape who whispers, "Justice is the Force," and then seems to sort of disappear. Now, for clarity, restraining bolt, in essence, it's how it sounds. If you put that on a droid, they have to do whatever the controller of the restraining bolt does. I think R2-D2 has one when he's captured by the Jawas in A New Hope. In Solo, when they go to Kessel and L337 does that whole droid revolution, most of those droids have got restraining bolts on them. It's things like that. It's just a thing that stops a droid having any degree of free will or anyone else controlling them aside from the person who controls the restraining bolt. So the combat scenarios all finish and whatnot, and they head back to the prison. And the probe droid notes that Aphra is hiding something, and her anxiety spikes with the words truth and empire. Dek Nil, who is nearby while she's being mind probed, says that the electronic tattoos could be scrambling the probe and actually suggests cutting off her arm. But the Imperial is like, no. The Imperial officer on deck is like, no, I like your imagination, but no, we can't cut off her arm. It will cost too much money. If she will survive, we have to do cybernetics. It's just too much. But we'll note that just in case we get to the very last hurdle. So the officers take her back to jail as standard and said that they're going to continue the interrogation tomorrow. Lopset then appears, who Aphra occasionally calls Flopso, but I'm going to keep calling him Lopset. Lopset gives Aphra a transmitter, basically saying that you tried to escape, you tried to help me in things, and even though it didn't work out, it seems like you have some pretty good ideas. So if I can give this to you and then you can find a way out, if I can just kind of tag along, that'd be awesome. He knows that the Empire will notice the transmitter gets turned on within about a minute or so, but he says that he's just an electrician and she clearly knows people, so she sends out a transmission to contact one person in particular, and on the final page you get to see Sana Staros. Now, Sana was in the 4th issue of the first original run of the Star Wars comics, and she's actually identified with her name, I think, in Star Wars number 6, but it might be the 2nd volume. It's basically the first volume of Star Wars comics is called Skywalker Strikes, and that's issues 1 to 6, and then the next one, which is, I think, Showdown on Smuggler's Moon, that's when her character gets a little bit more flushed out. She interacts with Han and Leia a bit more, and it's basically, she was born on Nar Shaddaa, she's the captain of the Vault Cobra. I think she was introduced in the lore of Star Wars comics in canon. If you go back to episode 13 of Star Wars comics in canon, I give a bit more information about her. And her and Aphra's first interaction sort of in canon that we've seen was actually in the 3rd volume of the main run of Star Wars comics, which is issues 16 to 19, and is called Rebel Jail. I tackled that on episode 21 of Star Wars comics in canon, so go back and check that out, and you can find out a little bit more about how they sort of interact and things. They have a history, basically. Sana Starros is a really cool pilot and a smuggler, and she is also interested in at least women. I think both men and women. It doesn't make it abundantly clear. It doesn't really matter. It makes no difference. But Aphra and Sana have some sort of romantic past together, and Sana got hurt by Aphra in some way, and Sana doesn't like Aphra very much. So on to the next comic, number 21. It starts off with Sana getting a message from Hera Syndulla. Now, that is from the previous episode of Doctor Aphra. Hera Syndulla, she's a famous Twi'lek. She's in Star Wars Rebels. She's in Squadrons and things. I tackled her a little while ago. So if you see Star Wars Rebels, or if you've played Star Wars Squadrons, you should probably know who she is. But she's currently on a Lucra Hulk flight school. A Lucra Hulk, it was basically what the Separatists in the prequels used. It was the droids. It was basically a ball, and then it's surrounded by like almost a full ring, and they basically just use one of those abandoned ones as it's good for a flight school use, which is what Hera was doing in the previous stuff. But Hera is basically asking Sana to see if she can smuggle Aphra out. Basically, the reason she wants to do this was because in the previous episode it was confirmed that when I said, 000's memories were encrypted, and he was angry about that, well, Aphra also took loads of Imperial sort of plans and things, gave them to the Rebel Alliance, and then said, you can only have this if you give me, it was some stupid amount of credits, it was like millions or something, and they're encrypted and you can't get them without Aphra, so everyone is trying to get after Aphra because she keeps giving people information and encrypting it and demanding more money for them. While that's going on, Aphra is actually speaking to someone else about Vader, so it wasn't maybe Sana Starros that she contacted. Maybe that's just how they wanted you to think in the first issue, but everything will make sense in the end. But Aphra is speaking to someone about Darth Vader and the plot and the interrogation and everything that's going on. And it turns out she's actually talking to Tolvin about that. Magna Tolvin is the Imperial officer who's now an Imperial investigator, much like Thanos was in the Darth Vader comics, and she was an apprentice of Thanos, and she basically has this weird relationship with Aphra as well, which is a common theme around the Aphra comics. Essentially, Aphra tells Tolvin about everything, and then at the end says, now I've told you, you need to come save me, because if they do interrogate me and ask who else I've told, I'm going to tell them that I told you, and then you're going to be in the same trouble. And Tolvin's like, what? Which I just think is brilliant. Aphra is such a horrible person, but it is amazing to watch. Then shortly after, it gets notified to the Imperials on the jail that there was some unauthorized transmission, so all equipment gets confiscated from all the prisoners. Aphra's then walking and she seems to see an old man once again. It seems like a Force ghost sort of thing. It was the thing that she seemed to see when she heard the whole justice is the Force thing, when Decnil had his restraining bolt pushed in more. And then she notices that Lopset is actually stuck under an AT-AT leg, and his face goes a bit strange and weird coloured and whatnot. Lopset mentions that he now owes her twice, and he said that he had dreams about lightsabers and weird things, and he feels like this area is haunted and stuff. Aphra basically doesn't care, and then mentions the fact that Lopset is a shapeshifter, and then he basically shows himself be turning into 3 different people and saying how bad they are. Now, 2 of them seem to only be in this comic, and I can't see record of them elsewhere, but one of them is quite interesting. One of them is actually Dr. Cornelius Evazan. Now, he is mentioned briefly in episode 46 of Star Wars Comics in Canon, and you will know Dr. Cornelius Evazan because in A New Hope, when Luke is approached by that guy with a weird face, and he's like, I've got the death sentence on 12 systems. And he's, I don't like you. He doesn't like you either. And Luke's like, I'm sorry. And then, Obi-Wan interjects and slices off the arm of the alien. That guy with the weird face, that's Dr. Cornelius Evazan. So that's him, and his compatriot is called Ponda Baba. For people who are back in the old school days when Star Wars first sort of came out and you're getting the figures, he was called Walrus Man. The actual species is an Aqualish. But yeah, Ponda Baba, or a Walrus Man, or you could just call him Anaquilish if you don't want to give him a name for some reason. But he was the one who had his arm cut off. But Dr. Cornelius Everzahn, he's got a weird face thing. And he's also, him and Ponda Baba also appeared briefly in Rogue One as well. So that's fun. And Rufo is one of Dr. Cornelius's aliases, which is fun because I think that was kind of his name before they gave him a proper name when he was an action figure, just like Ponda Baba was called Walrus Man. They just called him like Rufo. And then when they actually started to hammer on in the actual canon a bit more and give characters many more names and etc., then they settled on Cornelius Everzahn and said that Rufo was an alias. And somewhere in the Clone Wars, you can actually see him on a wanted poster somewhere, which is interesting. I haven't spotted that, but I found that online, so there you go. So back to the main story, Lopset says that people use him a lot because, you know, he's a shapeshifter and people just use shapeshifters all the time for their own gain and then throw them away. While he's having that heart-to-heart talk with Aphra, well, I say heart-to-heart, he's trying to be nice and Aphra doesn't really seem that fazed. Tolvin arrives on the Akreska jail. Now, as Tolvin arrives, it shows that the Imperials are actually defrosting a boar, which I'll go into a little bit later on, what actually a boar is. But essentially, she's asking why they're doing that, and he's like, well, what are you here? Why are you going to try and achieve? Surely this thing will be able to do what you can't. And she's like, that's not what I'm talking about. Basically, I need more information from her about something completely different, and I want to get to her before you basically interrogate her and inevitably kill her. So can you just let me go there and let me interrogate the prisoner, and we can have this all sorted. Now, she's in the room and she asks everyone to leave. One person has to stay due to protocol, and she tells this person to turn around and hum to themselves while she speaks to the prisoner because it's classified information. She then gets up close to the glass and then she basically she presses a button on her arm and it seems to play this recording of her basically yelling at Dr. Aphra, and in the yelling, she kind of whispers in amongst it so that Aphra can hear the whispering but everyone else can hear her yelling and stuff. And they have that and then it kind of cuts away. It then goes to 12 hours later, and it's got Sana Starros speaking with Hera Syndulla over comms. Now, I just want to read this part out because I think it's really good dialogue, and it's one of the contributing reasons why I think Sana Starros is one of the most underrated characters. And obviously, she's in comics more sort of as time goes on, but I'd like to see her in live action. I think she's awesome. So I'm just going to read this out. And so Hera says to Sana, "Hey Starros, what's your deal with this woman anyway?" Talking about Aphra. And Sana says, "Let me ask you something, General. Did you ever care about someone so much it scared you just to think about them? Like, there's this vulnerable chunk of you literally walking around, separate from your body, where you can't protect it. Plus, worse, you know that if it does get hurt, it's most likely something you've said or done. But then, having to put all your weaknesses in this little box and gotten used to not watching it all the time. Up it gets, that little box, and it stabs you right through the kidneys, and it sets fire to your trust, and just jumps up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down on it forever, smiling. You ever had that, ma'am?" And Hera's like, and Sana's like, "Ha, no, I see it in your eyes. You're all about tragedy, not treachery. It doesn't matter. Me in our galaxy like this, love only means one thing. Fireworks." See, that's a nice little insight into sort of how Sana's mind works and how she views Aphra as well. It shows Sana in her ship, the Vault Cobra, heading to Akreska jail, basically after Aphra, and it's showing that Aphra is on the Akreska jail, but the Akreska jail is currently in, once again, one of the sieges where they basically attack some sort of enemy ship, and then all the prisoners have to go out with droids and whatnot. And Aphra is with Lopset once again, and they're with Deck Nil, but Aphra manages to override the restraining bolt because Tolvin gave her some sort of Imperial override code. They manage to get to Tolvin, who is sat in a TIE fighter she's managed to hide, and she's got sort of disruptors around her so no one will notice that the TIE fighter's there and it's unauthorized. She's telling them to sort of come on and hurry up, and as they're approaching the TIE fighter, that sort of old man Force Ghost projection-y thing seems to damage some of the disruptors. Aphra says that she thinks it sounds like her mum's voice, which is quite peculiar. So Aphra then follows, and while she's doing that, Tolvin is yelling at her saying, "Come back, the disruptors are gone. We've only got seconds before they notice that I'm on here. We need to go." And Aphra's like, yeah, I'll be there soon. And she's following this old Jedi-looking being to a ship. And Tolvin is starting to get very agitated, look, you could literally die. And Aphra's like, but it could be really valuable. And she's like, okay, bye, 1 sec. And then basically heads towards the ship. And that is where comic number 2/comic 21 ends. So comic number 22, which is the third comic in this, starts with Tam Posler. Now, Tam Posler is the character from the previous Aphra story. They're basically like a mercenary, kind of. They've got quite a lot of cybernetics in them, and they were in a relationship with someone called Cason Bog, who got decranialized by Dr. Cornelius Everzahn. And in the last one, Aphra basically hacked into Bog's systems because he was part machine and whatnot, and basically made him run out into oncoming fire by lots of enemies, and he died because of it. Tam Posler couldn't ever truly prove that, but Tam is very much believing that she did that. Now, Tam is trying to seek Evazan for doing what he did to Bog and everyone else, because Evazan is a monster, and he's trying to basically search for them and things, and says, I'll get Aphra after I get Evazan. Back on Akreska jail, you've got Tolvin in the TIE fighter yelling at Chelly Aphra, saying that she's the worst thing that exists, and then she gets an alert that she's being scanned. As Tolvin is sort of panicking things, Tolvin clicks a button, which is the ejector. She flies out of the top of the TIE fighter as the wings get shot off, and it turns out it was Sana who shot at it with the Volt Cobra. But as Tolvin is shot out of the top of the TIE fighter, she shoots a rocket launcher type thing, and it hits the Volt Cobra directly. Back to Aphra. Lopset says to Aphra, what do you think's going on over there? And she's like, Lopset, who cares? And the panel here is really, really cool. It's got Aphra looking at the sort of Force ghosty person who now seems to more so be a woman, and there's just loads of things one thing looks like a lightsaber, there's some droid parts and things, they're all sort of floating together and clicking themselves together and whatnot. It then shows that the Force ghosty thing kind of looks like what Aphra remembers to be her mum, and Aphra says, you are not the ghost of my mum, and then proceeds to shoot multiple rounds at where this ghost sort of thing was. It basically dissipates and then turns into this gigantic space mold things saying the unworthy shall be digested. And essentially it's hook spores, which they're these crazy infectious spores that are basically heading towards Aphra. They're kind of like sentient spores almost, but it's like a giant space mold that looks pretty terrifying but is heading right towards them. They manage to evade the spores a little bit and go in a little deeper into where they're sort of climbing into, and they find a Jedi corpse that also has a lightsaber by its side. While this is happening, Sana and Tolvin are having a shootout at each other, and then both of them yell out at the same time, I won't let you kill that woman, and then they both stop shooting and are both like, wait, what? They stop shooting each other and sort of head for Aphra, and Aphra is exiting the area with Lopset, and Aphra calls Tolvin Snuggles, which is quite funny, but then also walks out and sees both Sana and Tolvin standing there and stares at both of them and says nothing. As that happens, one of these hub droids comes out and says to the prisoners, combat has ended, inmates must return and disarm, and Sana and Tolvin are like, we're not inmates, and the hub droid is like, disarm or you'll be immediately disintegrated, and they're like, okay. And then the droid looks at Aphra, says, not you. She's like, what? Grabs her and says that you're scheduled for interrogation. So this droid is basically dragging Aphra to go get interrogated again. So Aphra is now getting interrogated by Bor Ephraim, or Bor Ephraim. Now, Bor Ephraim, that name may mean nothing to you, but there's actually a being in Rogue One called Bor Gullet, which is in Saw Gerrera's Partisans' lair, and it looks like some sort of octopus thing with long tentacles and whatnot, and it is basically a way to read someone's mind. You can wipe someone's mind with it. It's basically like an ultra mind probe. It's beyond that capabilities of what current technology can do in Star Wars, and yeah, it's this being that can do something called emotional flagellation, which is quite interesting. So the race of these Bors, for clarity, the Imperials say that they've got 3 on ice, so 3 of these Bor things, and then obviously Saw Gerrera has one, which was Bor Gullet, but before the events of A New Hope, so by now that was actually killed from what we can tell. But the species are called Mayran. In Legends, they're in a book which is Young Jedi Knights, but they don't really seem to be about very much in the Legends or the canon, and in the canon, obviously, since Rogue One, it means they're fairly new-ish. But it's basically, a big octopus thing with long tentacles that can read your mind. That's basically what it is. It also mentions that the Bor could actually rewrite and change the details in someone's life. So someone could actually change their own childhood. They could basically torture someone by changing everything they think they know about themselves, which is pretty intense. It's got some really intense art where you see lots of flashes of some of the people that Aphra's hurt and some of her past and all these sort of other things that I really recommend. But then when she gets close to breaking point, she almost says Darth, but then she yells out disease, and she says about there's a colony of hook spores that are incredibly infectious that are going to get them all. And one of the texts is like, she is telling the truth there. It seems to be correct. Then the last few pages of this comic are bits and pieces. So one of them is where Hera isn't getting a response from Sana in the Volt Cobra, obviously because Sana isn't in there anymore. Tam Posler is en route, and he bought a ship from basically 000, which is quite funny, and is trying to track Aphra. And 000 seems to be on a rebel ship, because there's dead rebels around him and whatnot. And then back at Akreska jail, the panels for this final comic is an announcement gets made and says that The facility has been infected by some sort of biotoxin, so it is being decommissioned. And so all of the prisoners are being left there, and the jail is being flung into a planet full of rebel sympathizers, which will kill basically everyone. And Aphra gets chucked down with everyone else and says oops, and that is how that comic ends. So on to the next comic, issue number 23. This starts off showing 000 on a hijacked touring ship. It turns out that he's bugged the ship that Tam Posler was on, and so he hears a conversation between Aphra and Posler, where Aphra is basically asking Posler to save them in exchange for Dr. Cornelius Everzahn, because what she's done is she's asked Lopset to shapeshift again and become Dr. Cornelius Everzahn, and obviously Everzahn is the one who Posler is after, so Posler would reluctantly go and try and save them. Now, I just want to add here what's quite interesting is on the panel where it's got 000 in the hijacked touring ship, there's a couple of Bith out of space, sort of dead, basically, in the vacuum of space, with some instruments and things. And I just want to give this, it could actually be the Bith band from the Cantina. So in the main Cantina in A New Hope, it's called, I think, Chalmun's Spaceport Cantina. There's a band playing, you know, the ones that go obviously everyone knows that song. Well, the band that play that is a band called Figrin and the Modal Nodes. And so they're not in canon a huge amount, but what's quite interesting is that they're in a certain point of view book. In the certain point of view book about A New Hope, there's a story about one or two of them, I believe. In Legends, there's, I think, a lot more details about them. I think there's a few Legends stories that actually go into details. I think there's like a fictional autobiography of, or at least passages from a fictional autobiography out as well. But then I remember, I think the certain point of view book the story might be a section of that fictional autobiography as well. So it's one of those things where it's just a really cool. So the Bith is the species. So the ones that just like, you know, big peach-coloured alien heads with big bug eyes, no nose, and then kind of mouth flap sort of things, almost like a hole in where their chin kind of is. But the species is Bith. The band, as I'll say it again, Figrin and the Modal Nodes. I want to clarify, I'm saying Dan weird because it's D''AN, so Dan. And a fun little thing about the Bith species is that the Bith actually requested money from the Republic to assist them at one point when they were in difficulty. The Republic refused, so they joined the Separatists. This is in the Clone Wars. And even though they weren't involved in the war at all, because the Separatists gave them some sort of financial aid, the Bith were then prosecuted by the Empire when the Empire took over for siding with the Separatists. So because of that, many Bith actually then joined the Rebel Alliance, but they were posing as musicians. So obviously being a musician in Bith culture is quite a popular thing. So a lot of Biths, traveling musicians, and then it's quite a good cover for being a spy. So I just thought that was quite a cool thing, a little bit of Bith history, and also that wonderful band Figrin and the Modal Nodes. This doesn't confirm that they are dead, but it looks a lot like them. But obviously, if there are a lot of Bith musicians, it could be anyone. I think the idea is it's meant to kind of subtly hint it's them without explicitly saying it is them, just in case there are stories that come out in the future that then would contradict it. So I just want to throw that in there. That's quite cool. So back to the story. Aphra asks Lopset to change back into normal, and the Imperials turn off the ship that is dragging a Kreska jail, because they all abandon ship and things because of their worry of the biohazard. Because the ship that was dragging the Kreska jail gets turned off, the engines and stuff get turned off, it means that the tractor beam, it's a bit like a tractor mode. Basically in the middle of a Kreska jail, there's like a gravity device which is creating its own centre of gravity, which was why the jail kind of works. And so obviously when the ship dragging the jail stops and doesn't have thrusters on anymore, it then gets pulled into the jail. It almost crushes Aphra and the gang when they manage to sort of escape, but it does kill quite a few convicts. And now the entire prison is rioting and there's fire everywhere and things are getting destroyed. So it's pretty mental. So as I said, the convicts are rioting and things, and Sana and Tolvin are both, to quote them, murderously angry at Aphra. They're having a sort of back and forth between them, and Tolvin says, I am to you whatever I am, and you still had to blackmail me to get me here. I doubt you've got any friends coming or anything like that, when Aphra mentions about, contacting Tam Posler. And then while that's happening, the convicts, as I said, they were rioting. Well, they start to chase the group of people, especially Aphra, because they're like, hey, she got interrogated, and then suddenly they've evacuated the jail and we're all going to die. Clearly it's something that she said, so they all go after Aphra. Then that ghost fungus thing kills a convict that has this gigantic gun that was basically going to go for Aphra, and Sana manages to get hold of this big gun thing and asks for a little bit of assistance, and they shoot like a beam and it cuts this big hole made in the tug cruiser. For clarity, the tug cruiser is the cruiser that was pulling the Kreska jail. So the hole that was made in the tug cruiser, all the gang kind of go in there and things, seeing if they can figure something out, and they go into the comm center, and they can see that the Ephraim is sort of half frozen. He hasn't even been fully frozen back. And it's also been confirmed that the ship is actually on a collision course with a planet called Tifrep Major. Now, Tifrep Major is a rebel sympathizer planet. There's about 2 billion people on there, and 67% of the population are reported to be sympathetic to the rebellion cause. And I can't find any other mention of this planet, but you can imagine a planet with a quarter of the population of Earth having like a giant jail ship thing flung at it probably isn't the best. So Aphra starts to try and tinker with the gravity, trying to work out if they can do anything from there. And while that happens, Tolvin tries to contact the Empire. They don't believe it's her because they're like, well, we know that Inspector Tolvin is on a planet, galaxies away. You're clearly a rebel using her frequency somehow, and why would she be on a Kreska jail? That's stupid. And then they just hang up on her because she's trying to stop the jail being flung into this planet. And Sana and Aphra start talking and things, and Tolvin sees them sort of talking and whatnot because, they used to have a past and things. So as Tolvin can see them kind of getting closer, and Tolvin is aware that they have a past together, and Sana's aware that Tolvin has kind of got a thing with Aphra at the moment. And so Tolvin sends some sort of secret message to the Empire. While that happens, Aphra reset the gravity to half and rearranges a lot of the junk in the ship. And it turns out that the Jedi ship was actually moved as well, and that wasn't an accident. Now, when the ship gets moved, there's a whole page which is all about this space spore thing or the mold, fungus, whatever you want to call it, hook spores. And it's a really, really cool image. I'm not going to read out everything on there because this is the kind of panel that I want you guys to pick up the comic and read this actual comic to see it. But there's a little bit in here where the spores try and find a new host, essentially. And it goes to each of the 4 people, Sana, Tolvin, Lopsit, and Aphra. I'm just going to read out what they say about each one. So Sana: you are a thing divided, split between instinct and ideal. Tolvin: you have the focus I need, but the doubts eat at you like worms. Lopset: you... I can't taste you at all. Aphra: and you disgust me. None of you are used to me as hosts. You will all face my justice in the end. And then it all sort of disappears. They all kind of had a different interpretation. Like Sana says she saw her brother, whereas Tolvin thought that Inspector Thanoff gave her a demerit and all that sort of stuff. So it's quite almost like a force vision sort of thing by these force sensitive space hook spore things. It's a really, really cool couple of pages, so I really recommend you guys read it. And so as the mold basically says it doesn't need any of the hosts and things, it basically completely freezes in place, and Aphra tries to chip away of it with a pipe. It does nothing. It's gone completely solid. And so then Sana says, the only reason you're trying to get there is about that lightsaber, isn't it? And Aphra's like, And so Sana and Tolvin have to literally pull Aphra away because she's so desperate to try and get that lightsaber on the corpse of that Jedi. While that's happening, it shows that Posler is still on their way, and the final sort of panels is showing that the message that Tolvin sent was a secret message directly to Darth Vader, confirming she knows about the plot that he had to overthrow Palpatine and the whole Empire and all that sort of stuff, and requesting that they meet. Now, for clarity, the plot they're talking about is in the first run of Darth Vader comics from 2015 with Kieran Gillen, and that's when Doctor Aphra is introduced. So Aphra knows all about that sort of stuff that Vader's been up to, or most of it, and Vader tried to kill her. That was basically a loose end. And yeah, Tolvin requests to meet Darth Vader, and that is where that comic ends. So comic number 24 starts with the ship falling towards the planet, and you've got Tolvin and Sana in the pod. Just as the door's about to close, Tolvin jumps out, and so Tolvin, Aphra, and Lopset are all there together. Sana is in an escape pod headed away from a Kreska jail and things, just so if the ship hits the planet, she wouldn't be killed immediately. And the reason that Aphra stayed behind is to meet up with Tam Posler, or so she says. And so Lopset turns back into Evazan as Tam Posler arrives, and then Aphra freezes Lopset in place using this device that he was basically stood on, so that he's stuck as Evazan, and then he can just basically be given over to Posler without the risk of him changing back. The hook spore things sense Posler as it sort of lands, and so they leave the pod where the Jedi's corpse is. They go to attack, and as Aphra and Posler are still standing in the area where that freeze thing still is, Aphra just freezes them too. Posler then leaves with Lopset, and then Aphra goes and gets the lightsaber. Tolvin then makes a comment about how Aphra doesn't actually value her own life, and that's very upsetting. And then Tolvin and Aphra try and leave on a ship that Posler gave them, because part of the agreement with Posler and Aphra said, look, I'll give you Evazan, but you need to rescue us by basically bringing us our own ship. And that's what Posler does. So they get on their ship to leave, and then they're just about to fly off, and then they get shot down by none other than BT-1. So they crash, they get out of the ship, they run, and 000 is now walking on the jail itself, and he gets surrounded by convicts. And he kills them all in a pretty horrendous ways. He's got these like giant claw things. It kind of looks like Freddy Krueger, but a droid. It is pretty terrifying. And all you can hear is as sort of Tolvin and Aphra running away is screaming in the background. And Aphra's like, do not look, do not turn around, Tolvin. You do not want to see what's happening. Tolvin does look behind her and is completely horrified. And Aphra's like, I told you not to look. And then the ship is getting closer and closer to hitting the planet, and as the ship is kind of ripping itself apart somewhat, there are holes forming and some of the convicts getting sucked out into space. And as that happens, the spores then manage to completely unfreeze themselves. Then the ship suddenly slows down, and it's not an impact, Aphra notes, and it seems like they may be caught in some sort of tractor beam. Then as that happens, Aphra's going, what? How did this happen? And then Tolvin's like, I have a confession. She's like, oh no, what did you do? And Tolvin confesses that she actually contacted Darth Vader to try and stop the ship colliding as a sort of backup plan, just in case their plan didn't work. Aphra and Tolvin are trying to figure out a way to kind of get out and things, but Aphra actually makes this comment saying that it's actually easier to make people care about what you know more than who you are, and that's what people just use people across the galaxy for, which is it's quite an interesting way of looking at things. Tolvin says that she does care who Aphra is, and Aphra says, yeah, but you're nearly as messed up as I am. They make their way towards where the boar was, or rather, Aphra guides Tolvin to where Boar is, Boar Ithrium. And Aphra wants Tolvin to erase Aphra's brain so that Vader wouldn't kill Tolvin. And on that bombshell, that's where issue number 24 ends. So we now move on to issue number 25, which is the 6th and final comic of the Catastrophe Con story arc. So it starts off, Vader has landed on the ship and is just cutting through convicts left and right. He's pushing them out of the way of the Force, slicing them with a lightsaber. Just usual badassery by Darth Vader, as per standard in the comics. While that's happening, Aphra and Tolvin are basically still arguing about the options with the boar. So they're trying to discuss of whether or not one of them should have their memory erased or the other one, or what could happen, and trying to decide. And then Aphra plops in a little thing into the sort of system that seemingly controls the boar, and the boar puts the tentacles onto Tolvin. I want to clarify as well that Tolvin does actually say that she loves Aphra just before she gets grabbed by the boar, which makes it even more sad. A few minutes later, Vader then appears and attacks Tolvin, basically using the Force, throws her into the ceiling, holding her very tight, and is basically interrogating her. While this is happening, Aphra is actually watching on a holo, so she's hidden a little sort of holo communicator there thing so she can see what's happened. And she's actually crying as she watches this. And Lopset and Tam Posler appear, and Tam's like kind of mocking Aphra for crying and things, asking what's going on. And what you can see in the meantime is, as Vader is interrogating Tolvin and trying to kind of enter her mind to see exactly what she's thinking and things, I think not unlike what Kylo Ren does to Poe Dameron in The Force Awakens. I think that's the kind of vibe I get. Kind of like instead of a mind trip, it's kind of like a mind incept. Almost go in there and force the information out of someone's mind. It transpires that what Aphra made the boar do to Tolvin is make Tolvin think that she actually killed Aphra by slitting her throat. So Tolvin genuinely believes that because she was so in love with Aphra that she basically went mad and killed her. And so when Vader's basically interrogating her, he believes her. Meanwhile, Tam Posler is still antagonizing Aphra. Then Aphra pulls out the lightsaber she had, screams at Posler, ignites the blade, and then the blade sort of, after igniting for like 1 or 2 seconds, just then fizzes out. And Lopset looks and goes, this was like thousands of years old. What did you actually expect? Do you think it was going to work after all this time? It was covered in like space mold and stuff. And Tam Posler holds up a gun to Aphra and has a little, not quite a monologue, but basically says how pleased they are they're going to be able to kill them. And then you can see 000 appear just behind Tam Posler. And then Posler is on the floor screaming with 000 with his blade hands covered in blood, stabbing Posler over and over again, while Aphra and Lopset are standing there just in disbelief as it's happening. And then Lopset runs away. 000 grabs Aphra, and while that's happening, Vader takes Tolvin to his Imperial shuttle. She's like got bounds on her hands, and she's also gagged. And just before they get on the ship, Vader senses the space mold. Then some rebel ships appear, along with Sana Starra seemingly leading them, and the rebel ships blow up the shuttle, which propels Tolvin sort of away from the shuttle in the explosion. While they're sort of flying and the rebels are kind of trying to attack, they see some sort of red light coming towards them, and it turns out to be Vader's lightsaber that slices one of the X-Wings pretty badly. It's a really cool thing because Vader doesn't utilize his lightsaber throw anywhere near as often as he could in some of the comics and things, and I love it. As Vader's kind of distracted by, trying to deal with both the rebels and the spores and things, he decides to go after the spores because they seem to be right near him and whatnot. The spores approach, they have some sort of tussle, for a couple of pages. It's quite cool. And then Vader basically just says hasn't got any will of its own. It's just an echo of instinct. And then he uses the Force and just squashes it. And it makes a nice little squash noise, and it's just a puddle now. Vader then contacts the Empire and asks them to send a shuttle, and they ask if he wants to do a search party for Tolvin, and he says no, she's almost certainly going to die, but in case she's not, remove the tractor beam from this jail so it'll crash into that planet and she'll be gone no matter what. You see Sana she's landed her ship and is looking around, trying to find, I assume, Aphra, but she manages to find Tolvin under some rubble and things. Calling her the Imperial pet of Aphra, Sana takes Tolvin back to the Rebel Alliance. 000, holding Aphra, goes back to his ship and sees that the ship has basically been destroyed. Lopset is there for some reason and confirms that BT-1 was actually destroyed, and you see that Darth Vader was approached by BT-1 and completely destroys him. So that is the end of BT-1, it seems, unfortunately. As 000 is trying to process this information, seemingly getting angry, even though he doesn't get angry, but seemingly getting angry, Lopset then stuns 000 and Aphra and escapes on Tam Posler's ship. Now, on the last few sort of pages and the last few hurdles here, so the Kreska jail smashes into the planet, probably killing billions of people. While that's happening, Vader notes on official Imperial record that Doctor Aphra is definitely dead, so her entire case gets closed without a shadow of a doubt. While that happens, Aphra awakens on a ship and sees 000 and Lopset. Confused what's really going on, she's actually in a bind of some sort, and Lopset actually reveals that he is Dr. Cornelius Evazan this whole time, and he was wearing something called a pluriplek. And a pluriplek, I can't really find mention of it elsewhere, but it's this weird octopus squid thing, and you can put it on your head and it will basically allow you to shapeshift. It's a bioengineered thing. There's very, very few of them in the galaxy, but Evazan stole that and became Lopset to try and, evade the law and things. There's several pages of monologuing and talking and all that jazz, which the conversation is really cool, but I'll leave that to you guys to actually read the comic. But the way the comic essentially ends is that Evazan has put a bomb in 000 and it's rigged to blow if Aphra and 000 are more than 20 meters away from each other, or if anyone tries to tamper with the bomb in 000's head. And the comic sort of ends with 000 waking up and Evazan says to Aphra, you both deserve each other. You are basically a monster as well. I saw the sort of horrible things you do just to get yourself out of trouble. You both definitely deserve each other. And that's where that comic ends. And it's all going to continue in the next volume of Aphra, which is called Worse Among Equals. And so, yeah, guys, that is basically the overview of the Catastrophe Con issues 20 to 25 of Doctor Aphra. It's a really cool comic. There's loads of crazy weird things in there. There's some absolutely brilliant dialogue and some very funny moments. But as standard in Star Wars comics in canon, I'm not reading the whole comic out for you. I'm just giving you the general narratives and some connective tissue as well, just so you can get grips of what it is and you can still enjoy the comic, because the Aphra comics are genuinely really, really cool and weird and brilliant and clever in all the right ways. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. What we've got coming up over the next few weeks. So next week, I'm going to be tackling the Age of Resistance comics. It's going to be the one-shots, and this is going to be villains. So it's going to be quite interesting getting some background information on there's Snoke, Kylo Ren, Phasma, and Hux. There may be one or two more that I'm forgetting, because there's normally a special with a couple in there. But they're sort of the main ones. That's going to be quite intriguing. The week after that is going to be back to the main run of Star Wars comics, which is an arc that I cannot remember off the top of my head. The week after that is going to be the final miniseries, I think, of the Marvel Star Wars canon. The miniseries it's Canon, and Canon is a character from Star Wars Rebels. He is arguably one of my favourite Jedi ever, and Star Wars Rebels is absolutely brilliant. And it's all about a Padawan basically going through Order 66. It's not too different from, there's a scene in Jedi Fallen Order, the video game. There's a scene about Order 66 in that. It's kind of a little bit like that. It's a really cool comic, but it is 12 issues. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split it into two parts. It is basically like two mini-series, kind of. But yeah, 12 issues. Kanan, that'll be in a few weeks' time. And then after that, it will be, back to Aphra. And then once I finish the Age of Resistance Heroes, which will be, a month after next week's one, and I finish part 2 of Canon's, then I'll have a lot more sort of, I say free time, but not, it means that because I'll have done all the mini-series, then I can focus on some of the ongoing series. So the next thing I'd probably tackle is the Darth Vader comics, and then I haven't fully decided what I'll do for another week. I may end up just doing one episode about sort of new comics that are out and general reviews. I haven't made my mind up, but if anyone has any ideas, please let me know. I'd be interested to hear them. But we shall see. I've also got plans to speak with a couple of people involved with Star Wars in the next month or so we'll see how those things go as well. But yeah, aside from that, really, make sure you check the description of this show, the show notes and things of all the different collaborations I've been involved with. There's a few things that I've got coming up as well. I've got a Patreon, so make sure you go over, check that out. There's 2 free episodes on Patreon right now, which is my review of The Witcher Series 1 and also of the Star Wars The Phantom Menace. Myself and Megan have been doing like full rewatches of Star Wars, and we've watched documentaries, we've watched chick flicks, we've watched action films, TV series, all kinds of things. And we generally release 2 episodes a week, and you can go over to patreon.com/genuine Chit-Chat and you'll get access to 2 things completely for free, even if you don't become a patron or anything like that. But if you do want to become a patron, you can become one for only £2 a month or $3 a month. And then you get 2 episodes of Afterthoughts each week, which equal, between 10 and 20 minutes long each. So that's, half an hour plus each week of additional content. Plus you get early access to certain other things like snippets, or when I release things on my other podcast, Genuine Chit-Chat, you get early access to them. There's photos, collectibles, and other random bits and pieces on there too. So if you want to support the show, then that would be wonderful, because it helps pay for all these comics that I've been buying for this very show. Aside from that, and saying to check out my other show, Genuine Chit-Chat, which is on its own feed, we'll have a different guest on each episode. And aside from that, and checking out previous episodes of Star Wars Comics in Canon and all the other amazing shows on the feed of Comics in Motion, that is really all that's left, guys. So really appreciate you guys listening. As always, please make contact with me if you want any kind of suggestions, or if you have any questions or anything like that. Thanks to everyone who got involved in the Q&A episode last week. That was a lot of fun. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys next week. And as always, may the Force be with you.